A Babylonian recipe for stew is a map of the ancient world. These culinary instructions are far more than lists of ingredients. They are time capsules preserving the secrets of trade, power, and human connection. By the end of this journey, you will see the food on your own plate as a direct product of these ancient global networks. We will uncover how a single peppercorn could fund an empire and what Roman fish sauce reveals about maritime highways. What forgotten story is hidden in your favorite meal? That wheat in the Sumerian farmer's hand was more valuable than gold. It was a unit of exchange, a measure of a king's wealth, and the engine of the first cities. When you traded a sack of barley in ancient Mesopotamia, you were not just trading food, you were trading a stable, durable form of money that everyone understood and accepted. This grain-based economy forced humanity to invent entirely new systems. How do you fairly divide a harvest? You create standard weights and measures. How do you store wealth for the lean years? You build massive, state-controlled granaries that became the treasuries of their day. How do you record a debt of 10 bushels of wheat owed by one merchant to another? You develop writing. Many of the earliest cuneiform tablets we have are not epic poetry or royal decrees. They are receipts, ledgers, and contracts for grain. The very act of accounting was born from the need to track this edible currency. But this story of grain is not confined to one river valley. Follow the trail of a single type of rice, and you will map a network of human movement and adaptation. Archaeobotanists, scientists who study ancient plant remains, find charred rice grains far from their origins. These tiny, blackened time capsules reveal how Asian rice varieties slowly traveled westward, each new region selectively breeding it for local tastes and climates. This was not a simple exchange of goods. It was a transfer of knowledge, a slow-motion revolution in how entire civilizations fed themselves. The power to control this grain supply was the ultimate political power. The ruler who filled the granaries could command armies, build monuments, and sustain a population through drought. So the next time you slice a loaf of bread, remember that you are holding a descendant of humanity's first global currency, a substance that built empires and dictated the fate of kings. But what happens when you pair this solid, earthy foundation with something far more fleeting and pungent? That ornate drinking horn was far more than a container. It was a symbol of power, a tool of diplomacy, and a direct link to a hidden economy. In the flickering firelight of a Bronze Age hall, a chieftain offering mead was not just being hospitable. He was displaying his access to a complex web of trade, honey from local forests, spices from distant lands, and the skilled knowledge to transform them into a precious, intoxicating drink, all converged in that single vessel. Fermented beverages like beer, wine, and mead were the lifeblood of ancient social and religious rituals, and their creation demanded a network of resources. The barley for beer, the grapes for wine, and the honey for mead rarely came from a single place. A brewer might need specific grains from one valley and certain herbs from another, proving that even local production relied on established trade routes. This system was so vital that it became codified in law. The Hittite Empire of the second millennium before Common Era had detailed regulations governing beer production, dictating its quality and purity. This was not merely about taste, it was about economic stability and ensuring a standard product for trade and taxation. We can trace these ancient liquid highways through science. Chemical analysis of residue inside pottery jars, the shipping containers of their day, reveals the astonishing scope of the wine trade. Jars made in Canaan have been found in Egypt, their insides stained with traces of wine, while others have been uncovered as far away as Greece. This was a truly international market, with amphorae crisscrossing the Mediterranean Sea like floating invoices. But the true power of these drinks was not just in their trade, it was in their consumption. Sharing a drink sealed treaties, solidified marriages, and honored the gods. It was a deliberate act of community building, a way to transform strangers into allies. The choice of beverage spoke volumes. Serving a rare, imported wine was a calculated display of wealth and far-reaching connections. So the next time you raise a glass, pause for a moment. Is the wine from a nearby vineyard or a distant continent? The beer from a local microbrewery or an international corporation? Your choice is still a reflection of modern trade routes, a continuation of a ritual that once bound ancient empires together. This story of preservation through fermentation leads us to another, even more durable method of saving food, and with it, the very essence of a culture's taste. The scent on that Roman ship would have been unforgettable. A cargo of garum, the fermented fish sauce of the ancient world, was a testament to human ingenuity in the face of spoilage. Preservation was not born from a desire for gourmet flavors, but from the brutal necessities of trade and conquest. How do you feed a legion stationed in cold, northern Britain when the nearest ocean is weeks away? The answer was written in salt and smoke. Techniques like salting, drying, and fermenting transformed fragile fish, meats, and vegetables into durable, long-lasting commodities. A recipe for salted fish was less a culinary guide and more a blueprint for economic expansion. It allowed a merchant in Hispania to pack an amphora with garum, seal it tightly, and send it on a months-long journey across the Mediterranean, confident it would arrive not only edible but desirable. The evidence is etched into the earth itself. Pottery shards from broken garum jars have been unearthed from military outposts in Britain to bustling port cities on the Black Sea. Each fragment is an archaeological data point, mapping a distribution network of astonishing scale. In Rome, this pungent sauce was more than a condiment, it was a status symbol. Consuming goods that had traveled from the empire's edges was a display of your connection to a vast, powerful world. Provincial tastes were gradually integrated, creating what we might call the first global palate. The Roman appetite, driven by the need to sustain its massive cities and mobile armies, fundamentally drove culinary technology. This art of preservation unlocked the potential for global cuisine. But to truly understand the reach of these ancient networks, we must turn to an ingredient so powerful it could alter the course of history, a substance worth its weight in gold. A single peppercorn in ancient Rome could buy you a month's rent. It was not merely a seasoning, it was a form of concentrated wealth. Spices like black pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were the ultimate luxury goods, so valuable they were often locked away with family jewels. Ancient recipes functioned as public displays of this wealth. The Roman gourmet Apicius filled his cookbook with instructions calling for lavish amounts of imported pepper and cinnamon. Serving such a dish was a deliberate, aromatic announcement of your power and your access to the world. This insatiable desire for flavor became one of history's most powerful economic engines. It motivated kings to fund vast expeditions and pushed explorers to map unknown coastlines. The search for a direct route to the Spice Islands of Southeast Asia ultimately connected continents, creating a globalized economy centuries before the term was ever invented. The true power, however, lay not in the spices themselves, but in controlling the paths they traveled. These routes were the internet of the ancient world, transmitting goods, ideas, and cultures across thousands of miles. A single archaeological find makes this astonishingly clear. In the ruins of a kitchen in Turkey, Syria, dating to the 2nd century before Common Era, archaeologists found cloves. This aromatic bud could only have come from the Molucca Islands in distant Indonesia. This means that over 2,000 years ago, long before European explorers set sail, a complex, multi-stage trade network was already in operation, passing precious spices from hand to hand across the Indian Ocean and through the Middle East. Why would societies risk fortunes and lives for something with no nutritional value? The answer lies in the human psyche. Spices satisfied a deep craving for novelty and status. They transformed ordinary meals into exotic experiences, allowing the elite to literally consume the world. This story of desire and economics of empires built on taste was often sweetened by another, even more versatile substance. That Egyptian noblewoman's honeyed wine was a statement of geography and power. Her sweetener came from the local marshes, a luxury that defined her status against the common laborer's palate. For most of human history, the taste of sweetness was a rare and deeply local experience. Before sugar conquered the world, honey and fruit syrups like date molasses or reduced grape must were the primary sources. Their availability was dictated entirely by the local environment, by the flowers the bees could access and the fruits a specific land could grow. This made honey not just a food, but a valuable commodity. It was traded over long distances, collected as taxes, and offered as tribute to kings, its value sealed in clay pots that moved along the same routes as spices and cloth. A recipe for a Mesopotamian date cake was therefore a map of the region's orchards, while a Roman instruction for honeyed wine revealed a taste that could be satisfied close to home. But this localized world of sweetness was about to be violently upended by a single plant. Sugarcane, first domesticated in New Guinea, began a slow, transformative march westward. Its journey was a story of agricultural espionage and innovation. Arab agriculturalists, mastering its cultivation and refining process, created a new, more potent commodity. This was not just another sweetener, it was a substance that could be produced on an industrial scale, crystallized, and shipped across oceans without spoiling. The geography of desire was about to be redrawn with brutal efficiency. The perfect climate for growing this lucrative crop was not in Europe, but on tropical islands off the coast of Africa and later in the Americas. This single botanical fact, the plant's need for heat and rain, directly dictated centuries of human suffering. The establishment of sugar plantations became the engine for the transatlantic slave trade, as millions of people were forcibly moved across the ocean to work in horrific conditions to satisfy a distant world's sweet tooth. So when you ask how the sugar in your coffee reflects a deeper history, the answer is written in patterns of migration and exploitation that reshaped the globe. The pursuit of sweetness, that universal human craving, demonstrates with terrifying clarity how a simple taste preference can ripple outward, influencing economies, driving colonization, and devastating lives. This relentless quest to perfect our meals, to source the finest ingredients, raises a final, poignant question about the very nature of a recipe itself. That Mesopotamian clay tablet inscribed with a recipe for lamb stew is far more than a set of cooking instructions. It is a cultural document, a dense packet of information waiting to be decoded. When we read it, we are not just learning how to prepare a meal, we are reading the story of the people who wrote it. The very ingredients act as a fingerprint of their environment. A recipe calling for olive oil instantly places you in the Mediterranean world, while one using sesame oil grounds you in Mesopotamia. The preference for ghee or clarified butter points directly to the pastoral cultures of the Indian subcontinent. These were not arbitrary choices. They were dictated by the local ecology, by what the land could provide and what farmers had learned to cultivate over generations. The items left out of a recipe can be just as telling as those included. The strict avoidance of pork in some culinary traditions reveals deep-seated religious taboos. The seasonal appearance of certain herbs or vegetables in a list of ingredients paints a picture of a society eating in rhythm with the natural world, long before global shipping made every food available year-round. But the cultural clues extend beyond the ingredient list. The structure of the recipe itself holds immense meaning. Are the measurements precise, using standardized units like cups and teaspoons, or are they wonderfully vague, instructing you to use a handful of this or a pinch of that? This simple distinction speaks volumes about literacy, about kitchen technology, and about whether the knowledge was meant for a professional cook in a royal palace or a mother teaching her daughter in a home kitchen. A recipe for a massive feast detailing the butchering of multiple animals tells us about communal celebration and social hierarchy. A simple instruction for a daily bread, by contrast, whispers the story of mundane, everyday sustenance. By placing recipes from different cultures side by side, we can witness a fascinating dialogue of innovation. We might see two civilizations completely unaware of each other, each independently discovering the art of leavening bread. Or we might observe a unique, localized invention, like the complex fermentation techniques for soy in East Asia, that never spread beyond its region. So consider the recipe card your grandmother wrote, the one stained with drops of chocolate and butter. A future historian would see more than just a method for making cookies. The precise oven temperature hints at widespread access to reliable electricity and standardized appliances. The use of vanilla extract, a flavoring sourced from a distant orchid, points to a globalized supply chain we take for granted. The personal note she scribbled in the margin, "Add a little extra cinnamon for David," reveals the emotional weight we attach to food, the way we customize meals for the people we love. Every recipe, ancient or modern, is a snapshot. It freezes a moment in time, capturing not only what people ate, but who they were, what they believed, and how they connected with their world and with each other around the shared experience of a meal. This final insight, that food is the ultimate social glue, brings us to the heart of the matter. The longhouse fire roared, casting flickering shadows on faces gathered around a massive wooden table. In this world of smoke and storytelling, the roasted boar placed before a Viking chieftain was not just dinner, it was a calculated political act. Every slice of meat, every overflowing horn of ale, was a brick in the foundation of his power. Communal feasting on a grand scale was the ancient world's most potent social technology. It transformed a collection of individuals into a loyal war band, a coalition of chieftains into a unified force. The sheer logistics of such an event were a public demonstration of a leader's reach. Procuring enough ale, bread, and meat to feed hundreds for days required an efficient system of taxation, vast hunting grounds, and trade connections capable of delivering on demand. A king who could fill a longhouse with food and drink was a king worth following. This practice echoes through history, from the elaborate feasts described in Homer's Iliad, where heroes cemented alliances over shared wine, to the staggering archaeological evidence left behind. At sites like Stonehenge, analysis of animal bones reveals the slaughter of countless cattle from distant regions, all brought to that sacred space for massive, unifying gatherings. The menu was a carefully crafted message. Serving a local staple like barley bread reinforced a shared cultural identity, a sense of us. But presenting a dish seasoned with pepper from India or wine from the Mediterranean was a deliberate flex of economic muscle. It whispered of ships and caravans, of alliances with far-off lands, proving the host's influence extended far beyond the hall's walls. This ancient theater of power never truly ended. Consider the modern state dinner. The meticulous seating charts mirror ancient social hierarchies, placing allies close and rivals at a calculated distance. The choice of cuisine is still a diplomatic language, whether serving a visiting dignitary a dish from their homeland as a gesture of respect or showcasing local delicacies to impress them. Even the corporate gala, with its open bars and lavish catering, functions on the same principle, building company loyalty and rewarding key partners. From the Viking longhouse to the White House, the politics of the plate remain a constant. The ability to provide a memorable feast, to orchestrate a shared experience of abundance, has always been a fundamental tool of leadership. This deep-seated human need to connect over food, to build trust through a shared meal, points toward the final, most intimate layer of this story. A Mongolian herder's leather pouch of fermenting mare's milk holds the secret to one of humanity's oldest partnerships. The slightly fizzy, tangy drink called arag was not merely a beverage. It was a brilliant adaptation, a way to preserve a precious, perishable resource on the vast, open steppe. Across the ancient world, wherever people domesticated animals, they unlocked the potential of milk. But this was a biological puzzle. For most human adults, drinking raw milk was an uncomfortable, even dangerous prospect due to lactose intolerance. The real breakthrough came not with the first milking, but with the invention of processing. By transforming milk into cheese, yogurt, or long-lasting clarified butter known as ghee, pastoralist societies created storable, transportable, and tradable powerhouses of nutrition. A recipe for a specific type of cheese was in effect a patent for survival. It encoded the knowledge of how to use rennet from a young animal's stomach, or how to introduce specific bacteria or molds to create a durable, calorie-rich food that could travel. This knowledge became a form of technology as valuable as any tool. The trade was not just in the finished wheels of cheese or pots of yogurt, but in the methods themselves. The distinctive cheese-making molds of one region or the unique butter churn designs of another moved along trade routes carried by migrating herders and merchants. This cultural exchange triggered one of the most dramatic examples of recent human evolution. In populations with a long history of dairying, a genetic mutation allowing adults to digest lactose spread with astonishing speed. This was not a slow, random change. It was natural selection in action, favoring those who could fully utilize the nutritional bounty they had created. Your ability to enjoy a glass of milk without a second thought is a direct inheritance from your ancestral diet, a biological signature of your cultural history written into your very DNA. The story of dairy proves that our cultures did not just adapt to our biology, they actively reshaped it. This intimate dance between what we eat and who we are finds its ultimate expression in the most personal of spaces, the kitchen where generations of hands have prepared the same meal. That simple clay pot simmering over a fire was one of humanity's first laboratories. The evolution of cooking technology, from basic earthenware to sophisticated metal alloys, was a silent revolution driven by cross-cultural exchange. A new type of pot was not just a new kitchen tool, it was a key that unlocked entirely new ways of eating. Consider the profound shift from roasting meat over an open flame to gently simmering a broth in a fireproof vessel. This single innovation, the invention of the durable cooking pot, allowed for the creation of nutrient-rich stews and porridges that could sustain the very young and the very old, potentially altering population health and social structures. But these tools rarely stayed in one place. The design for a portable Roman baking oven, known as a klibanis, shares undeniable engineering principles with earlier Greek models, suggesting a flow of knowledge along Mediterranean trade routes. Similarly, the curved high-heat wok began its journey in China, and its distinctive shape and the stir-frying technique it enabled rippled outward, transforming culinary practices across East and Southeast Asia. A recipe is a set of instructions, but it is utterly dependent on the technology available. You cannot have a recipe for leavened bread without access to a reliable, enclosed oven that traps heat. You cannot have a recipe for a slow-cooked tagine without the distinctive conical clay pot that bears its name. The exchange of these tools was as crucial as the exchange of spices. A merchant caravan might carry sacks of grain, but it also carried the metallurgical knowledge required to craft a thin-walled, even-heating bronze pot, a secret as valuable as any spice. This technological evolution even reshaped the home itself. The introduction of the chimney in medieval Europe was a monumental shift. It drew smoke up and out, moving the hearth from the center of a smoky, single-room hall to a wall in a dedicated kitchen. This simple architectural change meant families could cook and live indoors with greater comfort, altering the very dynamics of domestic life and making elaborate indoor food preparation a more viable daily practice. Every kitchen tool, from the humblest grinding stone to the most ornate knife, tells a story of global innovation. Each one arrived, was adapted, and in turn, inspired new recipes that captured the taste of a changing world. Those Babylonian clay tablets were the world's first cookbooks. Etched around 1700 before Common Era, these instructions for stews and breads mark a monumental shift in human history. Before this moment, culinary knowledge was a fragile, living thing passed verbally from one generation to the next, vulnerable to being lost forever. The decision to press a stylus into wet clay and record how to make a lamb stew was an act of preservation as revolutionary as salting fish or fermenting honey. It meant a specific flavor, a particular technique, could now outlive its creator. It could be sent to another city, another kingdom, and be recreated in a different kitchen, perhaps with local variations, but with its core identity intact. This was the birth of cuisine as a formal, documented art. These recipes were almost certainly not for the common household. They were likely created for the immense royal kitchens and temple precincts, where feeding the elite and the gods was a matter of state importance. Standardizing these dishes ensured consistency for feasts that demonstrated a ruler's power and piety. The very existence of these texts speaks to a society with a specialized scribble class, one that deemed the perfect balance of broth and grain worthy of permanent record. Yet, for all their formality, these ancient recipes possess a beautiful, almost intimate vagueness. They do not say use 1 cup of barley. They instruct you to use a handful or a certain vessel known to the cook. They assume a deep, pre-existing knowledge, a shared culinary language between the writer and the user. This tells us the written word was not replacing the skilled chef, but rather supporting and guiding their art. So when we ask what it means that some of humanity's first writings were about food, the answer is profound. It means that alongside laws and epic poetry, we chose to immortalize the recipes that brought us comfort, that defined our celebrations, and that connected us to our land. The codification of a recipe was a civilizational leap, ensuring that a culture's taste could travel as far and as lastingly as the spices and grains that moved along its trade routes. A kosher seal stamped on an ancient clay jar was more than a religious symbol, it was a trusted brand. Religious dietary laws like kosher and halal functioned as the world's first rigorous food safety and quality assurance systems, but their impact stretched far beyond the kitchen. These spiritual mandates created powerful, self-contained economies within the larger tapestry of ancient trade. The rules were precise and non-negotiable. They dictated everything from the species of animal that could be consumed to the precise method of its slaughter, and even which foods could be cooked or eaten together. This specificity generated an immediate and constant demand for certified products. A Jewish community in Roman Alexandria could not simply buy meat from any local vendor. They needed a shochet, a ritual slaughterer, whose training and techniques were recognized by religious authorities. This necessity gave rise to specialized professions, dedicated market districts, and ultimately, entire supply chains designed to serve a devout clientele. The Jewish diaspora, scattered across the Mediterranean, required a reliable flow of kosher goods, especially wine. Because wine was used in religious ceremonies, its production had to be overseen by observant Jews, from the crushing of the grapes to the sealing of the amphora. This created a niche but robust trade network, with wine produced in the Holy Land being shipped to Jewish communities from Egypt to Rome, its kosher status acting as its passport. A similar economic ecosystem emerged around halal practices in the Islamic world, creating a parallel demand for properly slaughtered meat and other sanctioned foods that traveled along the Silk Road and Arabian Sea routes. This phenomenon was not limited to the Abrahamic faiths. In ancient India, Hindu principles of ahimsa, or non-violence, encouraged widespread vegetarianism among certain communities. This spiritual choice powerfully shaped local agriculture and markets, shifting economic emphasis away from meat production and toward a diverse cultivation of pulses, grains, and dairy products. The vibrant trade in lentils, chickpeas, and ghee in the Indian subcontinent was in part a testament to the economic force of religious belief. These ancient systems force us to look at modern dietary trends through a new lens. When someone today chooses a vegan or gluten-free product, they are not just making a personal health decision. They are participating in a global economic movement, creating demand that spurs innovation, funds new companies, and establishes entirely new supply chains, from oat milk factories to quinoa farms in the Andes. The profound link between what we believe and what we buy is ancient, proving that faith and food have always built markets together. This deep connection between sustenance and well-being extended naturally into another realm, where the line between food and medicine was beautifully blurred. That Egyptian honey poultice was more than a folk remedy. It was a prescription filled by a global marketplace. In the ancient world, your spice rack was your medicine cabinet. A pinch of turmeric from India to reduce inflammation, a spoonful of garlic from Central Asia to fight infection, a bundle of thyme from the Mediterranean to soothe a cough. These were not exotic luxuries but essential supplies for health. The distinction between a cook and a healer was often non-existent, both relying on the same pantry of potent botanicals. This created a massive and constant demand that fueled exploration. The famed Silk Road was not just a path for shimmering cloth. It was a highway for health, carrying cinnamon bark for digestion from Sri Lanka, ginseng root for vitality from China, and frankincense resin for its antiseptic properties from Arabia. A caravan was a moving pharmacy, its value measured not just in gold but in the potential for healing. The exchange was not merely in goods but in profound medical understanding. An ancient Greek text might recommend ginger for stomach ailments, while a nearly contemporaneous Chinese scroll prescribes the very same root for identical reasons. An Indian Ayurvedic manual and an Egyptian papyrus could both detail the use of honey as a wound disinfectant. This was not a coincidence. It was evidence of a vast, interconnected web of knowledge where successful remedies were traded, tested, and adopted across continents. The quest for these life-giving plants drove exploration as powerfully as the desire for gold or silk. Monarchs funded expeditions to locate the mythical sources of these healing spices, hoping to control their supply and secure the health of their people. This ancient system placed immense power in the hands of elite experts, the priests, shamans, and royal physicians who could decipher the properties of these complex imports. Today's so-called superfoods are simply the modern echoes of this ancient trade. Goji berries, chia seeds, and maca root are marketed with the same promise of vitality and healing that once accompanied shipments of ginger and galangal. The globalization of wellness is not a 21st century invention. It is a story written in the cargo holds of ancient ships and the saddlebags of desert traders. This enduring search for health through nature's bounty leads us to a final, beautiful question. How did these ancient flavors, once so rare and powerful, eventually find their way into the hands of everyday people, transforming from elite secrets into the comforting, familiar tastes of home? The Archimagus tasting a sauce in a Roman kitchen held a power far beyond his social status. As the head chef of a wealthy patrician's household, his palate could dictate fashion, and his skills were a direct reflection of his master's prestige. This culinary master was often a slave, a captured prize from a conquered land like Greece or Persia, forced to cook for his captors, yet in his hands he carried the entire culinary heritage of his homeland. He was a living, breathing repository of recipes and techniques, an unwitting agent of a profound cultural exchange. When he seasoned a Roman dish with silphium, a herb favored in his native North Africa, or introduced a Persian method for slow-cooking lamb with dried fruits, he was quietly weaving a thread of his own culture into the fabric of his master's world. The professionalization of cooking created a new class of knowledge worker, and their expertise was a carefully guarded asset, a form of intellectual property passed down through grueling apprenticeships, not written scrolls. The movement of these skilled individuals became a primary engine of culinary evolution. A master chef might be sent as a lavish gift from one ruler to another, a living testament to their alliance. He could be part of the spoils of war, his capture recounted as proudly as the seizure of gold or land. Or he might simply migrate along trade routes, selling his rare skills in a new city. A recipe for a complex Persian stew with its intricate layering of spices and meats did not arrive in Rome on a clay tablet. It arrived in the memory of a cook who had prepared it since childhood. How did the status of these chefs shape the food we eat? Precisely because they were often property, their innovations were absorbed anonymously into the cuisines of the powerful, their personal contributions erased even as their culinary legacy flourished. This constant migration of talent was as vital as the spice trade itself. It ensured that new ideas about flavor and technique traveled alongside the raw ingredients, allowing a regional cuisine to form. It was not just about having pepper from India, but about having a cook who knew how to use it in a dozen different ways. The staple grain of a region, whether it was millet in northern China or emmer wheat in Italy, provided the canvas, but it was the movement of these skilled hands that painted the masterpiece. That genetic leap from wild teosint to domesticated maize was one of humanity's most profound acts of bioengineering. The story of corn is the story of Mesoamerican civilization itself. Over thousands of years, ancient farmers selectively bred a scraggly grass with a single row of tiny, hard kernels into a plant with large, soft cobs packed with rows of edible seeds. This was not a random discovery. It was a deliberate, multi-generational project to create a reliable food source that could sustain cities. Maize became more than just a crop. It was the cornerstone of the Maya and Aztec worlds, so central that it was woven into their creation myths. Their gods were depicted as maize deities, and their sacred calendar was structured around its planting and harvest cycles. The entire social structure, from the laborer in the field to the priest in the temple, was organized around the cultivation and distribution of this single, vital plant. This pattern repeats itself across the globe with the foundational grains of other great civilizations. In the Yangtze River Valley, the systematic cultivation of wet rice created a stable, calorie-dense food base that allowed populations to explode and complex societies like the Shang dynasty to flourish. In the Fertile Crescent, it was the domestication of wheat and barley that provided the surplus energy needed to build the first cities and fund the first empires. Ancient recipes are overwhelmingly a celebration of these staples. A Sumerian recipe for barley flatbread, an Egyptian recipe for emmer wheat beer, a Chinese recipe for rice congee. These are not merely instructions for a meal. They are the ultimate expressions of a society's relationship with the plant that guaranteed its survival. The knowledge of how to grow, process, and cook these crops became the most essential form of cultural capital, passed down through generations. Why did these particular plants become the undisputed champions of the ancient world? The choice of a staple crop was a civilizational decision with consequences that echoed for thousands of years. A society that chose wheat committed itself to field agriculture and the development of the plow. A culture built on rice required the intricate engineering of terraced paddies and complex irrigation systems. These choices dictated everything. They determined how land was divided, how labor was organized throughout the year, and what the average person ate for every single meal. The trade in these raw staples was often limited by their bulk and perishability. It was difficult to ship vast quantities of grain across oceans, but the knowledge of how to grow them was a different kind of commodity, one that could travel in the mind of a migrant farmer or a captured slave. A seed, carefully preserved, could be carried to a new continent and, through trial and error, adapted to a foreign environment. This slow, patient transfer of agricultural wisdom was often more transformative than the exchange of gold or silk. It reorganized entire landscapes and rebuilt societies around a new dietary foundation. This deep, ancient relationship between a people and their staple grain makes the subsequent disruption all the more dramatic. The patterns laid down over millennia were violently upended by the Columbian Exchange, the sudden and massive transfer of plants and animals between the Old World and the New. The arrival of the potato in Europe and wheat in the Americas did not just introduce new foods. It shattered ancient culinary identities, forcing civilizations to rewrite their most fundamental recipes and reconsider the very plants they called their own. That Italian chef staring at a tomato saw not a fruit but a dangerous oddity. For generations in Europe, this bright red orb was considered ornamental at best and poisonous at worst. Its true potential remained locked away until it crossed the Atlantic. This single plant's journey is a tiny chapter in the Columbian Exchange, a monumental reshuffling of the global pantry that began in the late 15th century. It was not a gentle blending of cuisines. It was a sudden, violent collision of two biological worlds that had been separated for millennia. Imagine a chef's entire universe of ingredients, built over centuries, suddenly doubling in size. This was the reality after Christopher Columbus' voyages bridged the divide. The New World gave the Old World potatoes, tomatoes, maize, chili peppers, cocoa, and peanuts. In return, the Americas received wheat, sugar, rice, coffee, cattle, and horses. This was not a simple swap. It was a revolution that rewrote the recipe books of entire continents. The potato, a humble tuber from the Andes, would eventually conquer Europe, becoming the caloric foundation that fueled population booms and empires. The chili pepper, a fiery pod from Mesoamerica, would set Asia ablaze, transforming the flavor profiles of Thai, Indian, and Chinese cooking so completely that it is now impossible to imagine those cuisines without it. Before this exchange, Italian food had no tomatoes, Indian food had no chilies, and Irish food had no potatoes. The national dishes we consider timeless are, in fact, relatively recent inventions built on this new global foundation. This exchange was powered by the very trade routes we have been tracing, the sea lanes that now connected the globe. Spanish galleons carried silver from Bolivia to China, but in their holds they also carried the seeds of culinary change. The Manila galleons, plying the Pacific between Mexico and the Philippines, became floating arcs, introducing maize and peanuts to Southeast Asia and bringing Asian spices back to the Americas. This was the moment when regional cuisines truly went global, but this fusion was not always peaceful or equitable. The introduction of old-world animals like cattle and pigs reshaped the American landscape, often devastating local ecosystems. The arrival of sugar cane in the Caribbean created a demand for labor that escalated the transatlantic slave trade to horrific levels. The exchange was a package deal of wonder and tragedy, of new flavors born from immense suffering. So when you savor a slice of pizza or a bowl of spicy curry, you are tasting the direct result of this world-altering event. Your plate is a map of that first, fateful connection between two hemispheres. The Columbian Exchange proves that a culture's most beloved traditions are often the beautiful, complicated legacy of a much older and far more disruptive globalization. That Babylonian beer was likely thick, porridge-like, and flavored with aromatic herbs instead of hops. A team of archaeologists and brewers discovered this not in a library, but in a modern tank after they carefully recreated the recipe from a 4,000-year-old tablet. This is the cutting edge of experimental archaeology, a field where scholars step out of the lab and into the kitchen to bring the flavors of the past back to life. They are not simply reading about history, they are tasting it. The process is a complex scientific puzzle. It begins with chemical analysis of residues scraped from the insides of ancient cooking pots and storage jars. These microscopic traces can reveal the fats of specific animals, the presence of fermented dairy, or the fingerprints of ancient wines. Botanical evidence adds another layer, as scientists study ancient seeds and pollen grains to identify the specific varieties of plants available at the time. A Roman dish calling for apples, for instance, would have used a much smaller, tartar fruit than the ones we find in a supermarket today. Sourcing these authentic ingredients is a historical investigation in itself. It often means seeking out heirloom breeds of livestock, forgotten grains like Emma wheat, or foraging for wild herbs that have long since vanished from cultivated cuisine. When a chef attempts to cook a Roman patina, a kind of baked custard with pears and pine nuts, they must first grapple with the fact that Roman honey was often intensely flavored by local wildflowers, and their fish sauce, garum, had a potent, umami-rich character that no modern condiment can perfectly replicate. The final tasting is where assumptions are shattered. We might imagine ancient palates as crude or simplistic, but these recreations consistently reveal a sophisticated love for complex, balanced flavors. A sip of that recreated Babylonian beer is not a taste of something primitive. It is a taste of something different, a beverage carefully crafted to satisfy a discerning drinker in a bustling Mesopotamian city. The experience is a powerful sensory bridge. It connects us physically to the people who enjoyed these meals, making their daily lives and celebratory feasts feel immediate and real. So what did Caesar's favorite dish truly taste like? We may never know for certain, but each careful recreation brings us one step closer to a truth that texts alone can never provide. A direct, flavorful connection to the human hands that once stirred the same ingredients in a distant, flickering firelight. The Roman dinner party was a theater of power, and the menu was its script. At a formal cena, the host did not serve the same dish to every guest. The most esteemed person at the table might be presented with a platter of stuffed dormice, their tiny bodies glazed with honey and poppy seeds. Another honored guest would receive the delicate, seasoned brains of a peacock, a bird whose spectacular tail feathers would have been displayed in the room as further proof of the host's immense wealth. Meanwhile, a client or a lower status acquaintance seated further from the host would dine on a simple bowl of lentils or a piece of common fish. This was not an accident of the kitchen. It was a deliberate, edible ranking of every person in the room. Ancient recipes themselves were sharply divided by class. A papyrus might contain a simple formula for barley porridge, the fuel of the common laborer. Another, like the Cookbook of Apicius, was a catalogue of culinary extravagance, its instructions calling for lavish amounts of pepper from India and cinnamon from Sri Lanka, ingredients that had crossed oceans and deserts to prove a point on a Roman plate. The ultimate demonstration of this power was seasonality. Serving fresh grapes in winter or a fig out of its natural harvest time was a breathtaking display of logistical reach, implying access to special hothouses or the fastest couriers from a distant, warmer province. This connection between food and status was so profound it transcended death itself. Egyptian tomb paintings are not generic scenes of abundance. They are meticulously detailed menus for the afterlife, showing specific cuts of beef, specific types of bread and beer, and piles of specific fruits. The nobility ensured their eternal souls would continue to enjoy the high-status diet they commanded in life, a permanent feast among the gods. In some societies, this hierarchy was enforced by law. Certain sumptuary laws in ancient Rome and other cultures legally restricted the consumption of specific luxury foods, like certain imported spices or rare game, to the upper classes. A wealthy freedman could be financially penalized for serving a meal that was deemed above his social station. So when we look at modern foodie culture, with its obsession for rare heirloom tomatoes, single-origin chocolate, or cheese flown in from a specific Italian valley, we are witnessing the same ancient performance. The pursuit of the exotic, the scarce, and the authentically sourced is our contemporary version of serving peacock brains. It is a way of using our palate to communicate our knowledge, our access, and our place in a complex economic world. The ingredients we choose still draw a map, not just of our personal taste, but of our social coordinates. The sprawling port of Ostia was the stomach of Rome. Its massive warehouses, known as horia, were not passive storage units but sophisticated, climate-controlled engines of imperial power. Within their thick walls, the grain of Egypt, the olive oil of Hispania, and the wine of Gaul were systematically sorted, logged, and protected. The very architecture of these buildings, with raised floors to prevent damp and intricate ventilation systems to control temperature, was a direct response to the demands of the food trade. This was logistics on a monumental scale, a system designed to keep 1 million citizens fed. The Roman appetite was a powerful force of engineering. How did the demand for Spanish olive oil shape maritime technology? It led to the development of the massive, sail-driven cargo ship, a vessel with a deep, rounded hull designed to carry hundreds of amphorae in a stable, efficient manner. These ships were the container ships of the ancient world, and their design was refined over centuries for one primary purpose: moving edible wealth across the sea. On land, this network extended along thousands of miles of stone-paved roads, and at regular intervals along these highways, travelers found inns and taverns. Think of a caravanserai on the Silk Road, a fortified oasis in the desert. Here, a merchant from Persia might share a low table with a trader from China. The meal served would have been a living menu of the route itself. A stew might contain local mutton, but seasoned with pepper from India and thickened with rice from a valley hundreds of miles away. The innkeeper, catering to a transient and diverse clientele, became an accidental fusion chef, blending local cooking methods with imported ingredients. Recipes were not exchanged on parchment in these places, but through observation and taste. A traveler would experience a new way of preparing lentils or a novel spice blend, and if they liked it, they carried that idea in their memory to the next town. The design of the caravanserai itself, with its central courtyard for animals and surrounding rooms for people, was an architectural blueprint for cross-cultural contact, all built to facilitate the movement of goods and the people who traded them. From the deep hull of a grain ship to the central fire of a roadside tavern, the physical world was reshaped to satisfy a fundamental need, to move food from where it was grown to where it was desired, creating the very arteries through which culture itself would flow. The word sugar itself is a linguistic fossil of its ancient journey. It began as sarkara in Sanskrit, the classical language of India. Persian traders adopted it as shakar. Arabic merchants then carried it west as sakar. This sweet word finally entered medieval Latin as saccharum, eventually becoming the English sugar we know today. Each change in pronunciation marks another leg of a trade route, another cultural handoff recorded not in stone but in speech. The names of foods and dishes are living archives, preserving the history of their movement long after the caravans have turned to dust. The etymology of a recipe name can trace the entire path of an ingredient or a cooking method across continents. Consider the humble orange. Its name in English derives from the Sanskrit macron R, a letter 1A45G, which traveled through Persian narang and Arabic naranj before reaching Europe and becoming our orange. The fruit itself moved from its origins in Southeast Asia, but its name carried the story of that migration, leaving a trail of linguistic breadcrumbs. Or take the dish known across the world as pilaf or pilau. Its name has roots stretching across Persia, the Indian subcontinent, and the Ottoman Empire. This single term for a method of cooking rice reflects centuries of shared culinary practice and adaptation, its widespread adoption cemented in the very vocabulary of each culture it touched. Historians can reconstruct forgotten trade routes and cultural contacts by studying these linguistic footprints in ancient texts and recipes. When a Mesopotamian tablet mentions an exotic spice, the word used for it can be as revealing as the ingredient itself. It can point to a source region, a trading partner, or a conquered territory whose culinary traditions were being absorbed. This is a history that often remains invisible in the archaeological record alone, where a potsherd cannot tell you what it held, and a seed cannot tell you what people called it. The story of a meal is encoded in its name. So what is the hidden history behind your favorite food? Is there a spice in your pantry, a name on a restaurant menu that whispers of a distant land and an ancient exchange? Language is the fossil record of taste, preserving the memory of long-ago encounters in the very words we use every day to ask for a meal, to share a recipe, to describe the flavors we love. That Mesopotamian merchant did not simply barter a random bag of grain. He placed a carved stone duck, a standard weight, onto one side of a balance scale, then carefully poured barley onto the other until the two sides hung in perfect equilibrium. This small, sculpted weight was a cornerstone of civilization, a physical promise of fairness that allowed trade to flourish beyond the circle of immediate neighbors. The development of these standardized weights and measures was not born in a laboratory, but in the dusty marketplace driven by the relentless demands of the food trade. How could a merchant in Babylon trust a shipment of olive oil from a producer in distant Canaan? Both had to agree on the volume of a single amphora. How could a central authority collect a grain tax from thousands of farmers? It required a universally understood unit like the Roman modius. This push for precision was the bedrock of complex economies, ensuring that a debt recorded on a clay tablet in one city could be honorably settled in another. This culture of measurement, so vital for commerce and statecraft, slowly seeped from the public square into the private kitchen. The earliest recipes relied on intimate, inherited knowledge, instructions for a handful of flour or a vessel of milk. But as culinary formulas began to travel along those same trade routes, carried by merchants and migrating chefs, this vagueness became a barrier. A recipe for a prized Persian stew written in Susa would be impossible to recreate accurately in Rome if it only called for a pinch of saffron. Whose pinch, the move toward standardized measurement in cooking, was a quiet revolution in domestic life. It meant that a successful dish was no longer the sole property of a master chef with decades of instinct. The knowledge could be captured, quantified, and shared. This shift is beautifully illustrated by the Roman Empire's logistical obsession. The annona, the state-sponsored grain dole that fed Rome's massive population, depended entirely on the standardized modius for dry goods and the amphora for wine and oil. The very stability of the empire relied on this culinary consistency. So how did the invention of the measuring cup change home cooking? It democratized it. When a recipe could call for 1 cup of flour instead of 1 handful, it became accessible to a novice, to a daughter moving to a new city, to a scribe copying a text for a foreign noble. It transformed cooking from an arcane art, dependent on a lifetime of sensory memory, into a teachable science. The history of measurement is a history of building trust, not just between merchant and customer, but between a recipe written in one time and a cook reading it in another. It forged a shared culinary language that allowed flavors to travel the world and still retain their intended identity. A recipe from a time of famine does not list ingredients for flavor, but for survival. These desperate instructions detailing how to prepare tree bark, bitter weeds, or even clay to fill aching stomachs are the negative space in the story of ancient trade. They are the stark records of what happened when the intricate networks of exchange broke down. The collapse of the Bronze Age around 1200 before Common Era was not just a political event, it was a culinary catastrophe. As palace economies crumbled and maritime trade routes vanished, the flow of luxury spices and staple grains was severed. The archaeological record shows a dramatic simplification in diets. A recipe that once called for imported olive oil might be revised to use local animal fat, a quiet but telling sign of a world turning inward. The absence of an ingredient in the archaeological layers of a city's trash heaps can be as loud as its presence. When scientists analyze pottery residues and find that a once common imported good has disappeared entirely, they are mapping an economic collapse. These are not merely changes in taste, they are fingerprints of famine, drought, and societal stress. What can the absence of an ingredient tell us? It reveals the terrifying fragility of an interconnected society. A drought in Anatolia could mean hunger in Egypt, not because the Nile failed, but because the trade routes that supplemented local shortfalls had dissolved. The reliance on famine foods like acorns or leather tells a story of ecological knowledge pushed to its absolute, desperate limit. This negative evidence forces us to see ancient economies not as monolithic structures, but as delicate webs vulnerable to a single broken strand. The story of food is not only one of feasts and flavors, but also of empty granaries and silent ports. And it is often in the bleakest moments of scarcity that we see the most profound human ingenuity emerge, a determination to survive that would eventually chart new routes on the map, seeking not just sustenance, but a more stable connection to the world. A Roman recipe for spiced wine becomes a constellation of trade when its ingredients are plotted on a map. Pepper from the Malabar coast of India, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, and myrrh from the Arabian Peninsula all converge in a single clay cup in Pompeii. Historians now use digital mapping tools to trace these journeys with stunning precision. By layering data from sunken shipwrecks, the distribution patterns of amphora shards, and merchant ledgers, they can animate the ghostly arteries of ancient commerce. These geographic information systems, or GIS, transform lists of goods into flowing, visual narratives. We can watch as digital dots representing Egyptian grain ships congregate at the port of Ostia, or follow the overland path of Central Asian ginger as it inches toward the Mediterranean. The resulting maps reveal a planet stitched together by taste. They prove that a citizen of Rome 2,000 years ago could enjoy a meal whose components had collectively traveled farther than most people would in a lifetime. This was a form of miniature globalization, where a single stew pot could contain the entire known world. The distance your own dinner ingredients traveled is a modern echo of this ancient system. These culinary maps do more than chart economics, they illustrate a profound human truth. Our desire for flavor has always been a powerful force for connection, drawing the world closer, one recipe at a time. That Babylonian irrigation canal was more than a waterway. It was a delicate pact with the environment. Ancient civilizations understood a fundamental truth that modern industry often forgets, that long-term survival depended on working with the land, not merely extracting from it. Sustainability was not a buzzword, it was the baseline for existence. The Mesopotamians, for instance, engineered vast networks of canals and levees to manage the unpredictable floods of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a system that turned a challenging landscape into a breadbasket for millennia. The Romans perfected crop rotation, intuitively grasping that alternating legumes with grains could replenish soil nitrogen, preserving the fertility of their fields for generations. This wisdom was not confined to the Old World. In the Americas, indigenous cultures developed the brilliant Three Sisters agricultural system. Corn provided a sturdy stalk for the beans to climb. The beans fixed essential nitrogen into the soil to feed the corn, and the sprawling squash leaves created a living mulch that suppressed weeds and conserved precious moisture. These three plants, grown together, created a symbiotic relationship that was far more productive and resilient than any one of them grown alone. Ancient recipes were the direct result of these sustainable systems. A Roman cookbook from the 1st century would not call for strawberries in December. It relied on what was locally available and in season, a practice that inherently minimized the environmental cost of food. The global spice trade added flavor and luxury, but the bulk of every meal, the grains, the vegetables, the legumes, were sourced from a tightly bound local ecology. Even the trade in salt, that universal preserver, was inherently sustainable in its simplicity. It was a mineral resource mined from the earth or evaporated from the sea, and its value lay in its permanence, a single shipment preserving countless other perishable foods and reducing waste on a massive scale. So what can we learn from the past about eating locally? The lesson is not that we must abandon global trade, but that we can recenter our diets on the resilient, seasonal patterns our ancestors understood. The ancient world shows us that the most secure food system is a diverse one, built on intimate knowledge of a specific place. Their recipes are more than instructions. They are a testament to a deep, hard-won ecological intelligence, a reminder that the most enduring feasts were always those that honored the land which provided them. The ancient Egyptian festival of Wepet Renpet did not simply mark a new year. It activated an entire economy. As the Nile's floodwaters receded, revealing fertile black soil, the demand for specific ritual foods surged. Dates, certain fish, and a special, slightly fermented bread were not merely symbolic. Their consumption was a religious obligation, a direct command that sent merchants and farmers scrambling to meet a sudden, concentrated demand. This was not random trade. It was a rhythm, a heartbeat pulsing through the ancient world, timed to the unchanging turn of the seasons and the sacred calendar. In Greece, the women-only festival of the Smaphorия required cakes made from specific grains and seeds, items that became precious commodities in the weeks leading up to the rites. But perhaps the most dramatic example unfolded each spring in Jerusalem. For the festival of Passover, every Jewish family needed a sacrificial lamb. This single religious requirement transformed the city into a massive, temporary livestock market, drawing shepherds and traders from across Judea and beyond. The streets would swell with the bleating of thousands of sheep, their value skyrocketing as the festival date neared. This was a cyclical economic engine, predictable as the sunrise. The calendar itself became a powerful force of commerce. These festivals created guaranteed, high-demand windows. A farmer knew that if he could get his pomegranates to a certain city for its annual goddess celebration, he would be paid a premium. A spice merchant could plan his entire year around the caravan routes that supplied these ritual feasts. The recipes for these festival foods were often untouchable, passed from mother to daughter or priest to acolyte with a sacred precision that resisted change for centuries. The taste of the divine had to remain constant. This ancient rhythm of faith and food never truly vanished. How does the modern demand for turkey every November shape poultry farms and global grain markets? The frantic search for specific candies each Halloween or the global shipping of Christmas delicacies like panettone are the direct descendants of these ancient cycles. Our calendars still dictate what fills our plates, proving that the most powerful economic forces are often not inventions or discoveries, but the timeless, repeating rituals that give our years their meaning and our meals their deepest significance. A broken lamb bone discarded in a Roman gutter tells a quieter, more truthful story than any royal cookbook. While ancient recipes offer a script for what people aspired to cook, the contents of a trash heap reveal what they actually ate day after day. Archaeologists call these ancient garbage dumps middens, and they are perhaps the most democratic archives we have. They preserve the meals not of kings, but of farmers, merchants, and soldiers. By sifting through layers of discarded animal bones, broken pottery crusted with residue, and charred seeds, we gain an unfiltered view of the ancient palate. The evidence is quantitative and relentless. A recipe for a lavish stew might call for prime cuts of beef, but the midden tells a different story. It reveals a preponderance of cheaper, tougher cuts, of sheep knuckles and pig feet, bones that were boiled and reboiled to extract every last bit of nutrition and flavor for the common pot. This is the archaeology of daily sustenance. By comparing middens from different centuries in a single location, we can watch history unfold through its leftovers. In the early layers of a Roman British town, the bones are from local livestock and the charred seeds are from native grains. Then, in a layer dating to the 2nd century, a new type of pit appears, that of a peach stone. This single piece of garbage is a fossilized data point. It marks the moment when a fruit, first domesticated in Persia and cultivated in Roman gardens in Italy, finally made its way to the remote, rainy province of Britannia. It was not a food for the masses, likely a rare treat for a wealthy merchant, but its presence in the soil is proof of a connected world. Similarly, the sudden appearance of fish bones from the North Sea in an inland settlement's midden speaks of improved preservation techniques and expanding trade routes, bringing the taste of the ocean to people far from the coast. What will future archaeologists deduce from our own landfills? The layers of plastic packaging, the specific ratios of chicken bones to beef scraps, the international origins of avocado pits and banana peels all tossed together will paint a stark portrait of a globalized, packaged, and wasteful food system. Our garbage will tell them not what our celebrity chefs preached, but what we actually consumed in our millions of daily meals. This silent testimony of kitchen waste completes the picture, balancing the aspirational recipes of the elite with the gritty reality of everyday life. It proves that the true story of a culture's diet is written not only in its cookbooks, but in its refuse, a narrative etched in broken pottery and discarded bones. That heritage breed turkey on your Thanksgiving table is a living link to a 4,000-year-old recipe. The modern movement to revive ancient grains like einkorn and emmer wheat is far more than a food trend. It is a conscious return to the nutritional and ecological wisdom encoded in our oldest culinary traditions. These forgotten staples often boast richer flavors and more robust nutritional profiles than their modern, mass-produced counterparts, having been bred for survival and taste over shelf life and yield. In kitchens around the world, chefs are now acting as culinary archaeologists, poring over Roman cookbooks and Mesopotamian tablets to create dishes that are simultaneously novel and profoundly historical. They are discovering that a stew seasoned with long-forgotten herbs or a bread baked from an ancient strain of wheat offers a direct sensory connection to the past, a taste of a world before industrial agriculture. This revival is a quiet rebellion against the homogenization of our global palate, a choice to value diversity and resilience over convenience. Yet, even as we look backward for inspiration, we are fully enmeshed in the modern incarnation of the very systems our ancestors built. The coffee in your morning cup, the chocolate in your dessert, the pepper on your stove, these are all delivered by global supply chains that are the direct, sprawling descendants of the Silk Road and the Roman grain fleets. The journey of a single coffee bean from an Ethiopian highland to a supermarket shelf mirrors the path of a peppercorn traveling from India to Rome, a testament to an enduring human desire for the distant and the delicious. Understanding this deep history fosters a profound appreciation for the food on our plates, but it also demands that we acknowledge the complex and often deeply unjust systems that bring it to us. The same routes that once carried spices and silks later facilitated the slave trade and colonial exploitation, a legacy that still shapes economic disparities today. So, can we create a more ethical global food system by learning from the past? The study of ancient recipes provides a critical lens for this exact question. It reminds us that our choices as eaters are never neutral, that every purchase supports a web of human labor and environmental impact. It urges us to consider the legacy we are now creating, to ask whether our modern recipes will tell a story of thoughtless consumption or one of mindful connection, a story future generations will be proud to inherit. From the Babylonian lamb stew to the Roman garum jar, these ancient recipes have been our guides, silent historians etched in clay and memory. They have shown us that a list of ingredients is never just a list. It is a map of economic ambition, a testament to religious faith, a record of technological ingenuity, and a mirror of social hierarchy. The globalization we often consider a modern phenomenon is, in fact, an ancient story written in saffron, salt, and steam. Every meal you eat is the culmination of countless such journeys, a gathering of flavors from across the globe and across the centuries onto a single plate. So the next time you sit down to dinner, pause for a moment, look at the food before you, that humble grain of rice, that sprinkle of pepper, that splash of oil. Each one carries the echo of a caravan, the shadow of a sail, the whisper of a forgotten chef. What hidden history have you invited to your table tonight? We would love to hear your stories. Do you have a family recipe passed down through generations? One that might hold its own secrets of migration or cultural fusion? Share them in the comments below, and if you have enjoyed this journey through the deep history of flavor, consider subscribing. Together, we can continue to unravel the delicious mysteries of our shared past.